Well, good evening, everybody, and first and foremost, thank you. What an outstanding turnout this is of people who are here who care enough about their city and their neighbors to be a part of finding solutions to the most critical issue of, I think, our time right now here in Los Angeles. It means a great deal to me that all of you took the time to be here tonight, and I thank you for it. I'm Councilmember Krekorian. I have the privilege of representing much of the eastern part of the San Fernando Valley in Council District 2, including Valley Glen, Studio City, North Hollywood, Valley Village, Van Nuys, and Sun Valley. And I'm very proud to be hosting tonight's event along with my good friends at the North Hollywood Community Police Advisory Board, and I want to thank the CPAB, especially their president, Ron Drescher, who I saw a minute ago. Where's Ron? So, Ron, wave your hand. Thank you to you and all of the CPAB members for the work that you do in supporting LAPD and making our whole community safer, and for making tonight happen as well. I also want to thank our neighborhood councils who participated in tonight's event, NoHo West for providing our refreshments, and North Hollywood Northeast for the use of their timekeeping equipment. And the timekeeping equipment is going to be critical tonight, I have a feeling, that because we've got a lot to cover and not enough time to cover it all, so we're going to try to move really quickly and get you the information that you came here to get. I also want to give a very big thank you, of course, to LA Valley College. LA Valley College has been such a critical part of our neighborhood, our community, everything that happens in terms of jobs creation, so many other things that we work on. We're proud to have Valley College as our partner and for hosting us here tonight. And as President Endrijonas will discuss in just a moment, it's also kind of exemplary of the issues that we face with homelessness too, because the college is impacted by homelessness, and it also has a lot of homeless students who are trying to turn their life around and have a better opportunity for themselves. We're streaming this meeting tonight right now on Facebook Live, so if there's anything you want to go back and check later or review, you'll have that opportunity. Just shortly after Dr. Endrijonas comes up to speak, I'll speak about ground rules and some other things for this evening, talk about the agenda that we have. But first, I would like to welcome and thank our host for this evening, Dr. Erika Endrijonas, the president of LA Valley College.
Well, welcome everyone. Good evening. All right. You know, this is very gratifying because when Councilman Krekorian's office approached us a few months ago and said, hey, would you mind sponsoring this? We don't know how many people are going to come. This is such an important topic. Of course, we jumped on the opportunity to do it. And I have to say that seeing all of you out there, knowing that we have an overflow room in the across the hall, it tells me we couldn't be at a better time in a better place to deal with a significant issue like homelessness. And LA Valley College is not immune to that. I'm sure many of you might have seen the story in the LA Times about 6 months ago. We did a survey. 1 in 5 students in the LA Community College District is homeless. We're not entirely sure exactly how homeless. That could be I'm living in my car or I'm couch surfing. But think of it, 1 in 5 out of 250,000 students that we serve. And that's a huge number. And for our college, well over 35% of our students are also parents. So there are so many students out there that are not only homeless, but they're parents, and they're grappling with this problem as well. And so we are acutely aware of what needs to happen, and some colleges have been slow to pick up the gauntlet, pick up the mantle to deal with this. I am so fortunate that at this college to have amazing professionals. We have we have many ways that we help homeless students. One way is with our Helping Hands group, and that is a group of dedicated professionals on my campus who have other jobs. They're not necessarily hired to do Helping Hands. They have other jobs, but they fundraise, they collect food. We're working with Food Forward. We're working with the fabulous people at the Village Family Services to help deal with this homelessness problem. We have the only family resource center in the state that helps parents, many of whom are homeless, and that's what we're here about. So I am so happy to see all of you here, all of you engaged, and please know that we're engaged, and we have services for homeless students. Thanks to a bill that passed in the Assembly last January, we provide showers for homeless students 2 hours a day. And thanks to all the hard work of Helping Hands folks, we have towels. We have all kinds of things that we have amassed. And over on the other side of this wall, by the beginning of our spring semester, we're going to have our food pantry that we're going to open for probably about 2-3 hours a day to try to help homeless students. We do have some food pantries right now, but the food goes almost immediately. So again, welcome. Thank you for being here. And, you know, I'm a college president, so I always have to say that there may be 2 other colleges in the LA Community College District here in the San Fernando Valley, but you are at the Valley College. So welcome.
Thank you very much, President Endrijonas. I want to go over just a couple of assumptions I have about the folks here. First of all, if you live in my district, can you raise your hand? Just, okay, fantastic. I was hoping that would be the case. So I'm going to assume that we have people with a broad cross-section of views about this issue, and a broad range of issues that you want to bring for discussion today. But I'm also going to assume a few things that we probably all will share, that we'll all have in common. I think one is an incredible sense of urgency about addressing this problem. And I think no matter how you view homelessness, how you view its impacts on our city, I think all of us agree we have to get to work. We have to get to work in solving this. And I think the flip side of that is probably a lot of people in this room, regardless of what you think about this issue, probably are angry about some aspect of it. I get it. I'm angry about it too. And so let's just understand that I think we all share a desire to come out of this room with something productive and getting to work in solving this problem. And all of us have to do it together. This is not a job for the city. It's not a job for the county. It's not a job for our representatives in Sacramento. It's all of us and all of you and all of our service providers and the faith community and educators and everybody else who has to grab an oar if we're going to make a big difference in this. So I think that your being here is a huge first step in us doing that, and I want to thank you for that, because this is a crisis unlike anything that we've ever faced, at least in my lifetime here. It comes from many different sources. It has many different impacts to all kinds of different stakeholder groups, to our neighborhoods, to obviously the homeless community itself, to our schools, to our businesses. There's so many different aspects of this. We're going to touch upon a lot of those tonight. I do think that one of the goals that we've had is to bring together the leading experts in many of the areas, many of the issue areas that the city and the county are grappling with right now. And so they're going to be here presenting and then responding to your questions in just a moment. But I want to provide a little bit of context too. Right now, there's about 34,000 homeless individuals in the city of Los Angeles today. 34,000. Think of that number. Think of it in terms of like Dodger Stadium having a capacity of 55,000. 34,000 Angelenos are without a home today. About 4% of them live in this district. So when you see what you see around our district, realize that's just 4% of our city's problem. And you begin to get kind of a sense of the magnitude of that. Why do we have this huge problem? Our speakers will address this, but there's no one answer. There's many answers. One is we are one of the least affordable cities in America. Our rents have skyrocketed, and in some respects, that's a product of economic success, but it's also a product of the fact that we have so many people who are moving here. We have so many, economic increases that are happening that people are charging a lot more for rent, and salaries and certainly fixed incomes are not keeping up with that. So more and more people are getting to the point where they're on that cusp of falling into homelessness with one illness, one injury, one job loss, and so on. So a lot of it is just the economics right now of Los Angeles. Another is, look, let's face it, folks, for 40 or 50 years, this state, this country, has not done what it needs to do to address mental illness and substance abuse. We have just failed to do that, and we're reaping what we've sown now. And there's many different other issues too. There's family disintegration. There's issues of, rejection for all sorts of reasons. LGBT youth who've been rejected by their families who come here. There are many, many reasons. Each one of those reasons presents a whole set of responses that are necessary. So there is no one solution that we're going to say, oh, well, if we just did that, we'd solve the problem. It's not going to work that way. We have to address each individual homeless person as an individual, figure out what that problem is that they need, and deliver those services, or else, and we have to keep sustaining that, do it a little bit at a time until we address this problem, but with a sense of urgency. So speaking of that urgency, thank you to all of you who have declared that you support this effort by your approval of Measure H and Measure HHH. These are steps in the direction that we need to take to begin addressing this. So it's going to be up to us now to deliver on what you have expected us to do with those resources. And again, that's where our panel is going to have a lot to talk about. A few of the things that we're doing quickly before I get to the panel here locally. So I just want you to know that, my office has been aggressively working on some of these issues in a variety of ways. Number one, we've conducted 9 Homeless Connect Days throughout the district, where we bring the homeless into a room like this, and right there in that room, we have every service provider and every government representative that they could possibly need to talk to solve their problem. So we essentially triage them when they come in the room. You're a veteran, come and meet Mr. So-and-so from the Veterans Administration who can get you veterans benefits. Oh, you've lost your driver's license and you can't get government benefits? Good news. We have somebody from the DMV right here who can print an ID for you. Whatever service they need, we were able to deliver it, and it's been tremendously successful. We've helped over 1,000 people through these Homeless Connect Days alone. We're building permanent supportive housing in this district. And sometimes that's controversial, but you know what? If we don't build housing for the homeless, we're never going to solve this problem. If we don't increase shelter space, we're never going to solve this problem. So we're doing it. We opened the Crest Apartments, beautiful new building, 64 units, and it's helping people who are already in this neighborhood, who are ready to take that leap out of homelessness, go through that door and hopefully have a permanent solution to that. We're also working on trying to address the challenge of people living in their RVs, and we're looking for safe parking opportunities. We've done a lot of work on that, which we'll talk about later, but it's another one of the steps that we've taken. And of course, my staff, and I want everybody on my team to raise your hand and wave it around a little bit so everybody can identify Krekorian staff members here, a bunch of them at the door. Here we are, here we are, here we are. The folks in my district office respond to your calls every single day on this issue, every single day, and deal with encampments, and deal with RVs, and deal with, people who are leaving, refuse and things in parks or misusing the libraries. We're dealing with these problems on a daily basis, and we should. So keep those calls coming. Let our office be the one that helps you in trying to find these solutions, and let us know where you're seeing the biggest degree of problems. So just quickly on ground rules, and I'm sorry, I don't want to get us behind schedule. As I mentioned before, we're going to have a wide variety of views. You may even hear some difference of views among our panelists even. But I think it's important, if we're going to get anything out of this evening, and you all dedicated this time to it, if we're going to make this productive, let's try to be respectful to one another, even if we disagree with them. I'm going to go through questions that you have submitted. I've tried to consolidate them as much as I can, because a lot of them, were on the same topics. So we've tried to consolidate them as much as we can in the interest of time efficiency, so we can get through as many of them as we can. So after the panelists present, I'm going to do that. I'm going to spend about almost an hour just with questions. And then when we conclude that part of the questions, I'm confident that many of you will say, well, my question didn't get answered. Or, well, wait, what about this? I've got a difference. And that's fine. There's a couple of options for you there. First of all, we have these tables set along the side here. I'm going to introduce later, when we're done, all of the folks at these tables who will be able to provide answers to your questions directly. So we can split up. You can identify the person that you want to ask that question of, or the agency. They'll be here, and we'll stay until 9:30, answering your individual questions as well. And in addition, if you'd like to fill out a question card, which we have at one of the tables, which table is it at? At the check-in table. We have cards. You can fill out your question, and we'll respond to it. And if we can't respond to it, we'll find the right person who can respond to it. Okay? So we have multiple ways to get you that information that we need. So with that, just before we get into the panelists, I thought, Dr. Endrijonas started to put a little bit of a face on homelessness by talking about her students. And I wanted to take an opportunity to introduce you to a remarkable young man from our area who has personally experienced being homeless and has not only met that challenge, but has really succeeded. And I'd like you to hear a little bit about his story. So I'd like you to welcome with me Moultrie Potter. Moultrie.
Look wonderful. Hello, my name is Moultrie Potter. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. So I grew up in New York City, far away from here I know. I had a single mom, 11 brothers and sisters, but she did a great job, I'm sure you guys can tell. I want to talk about the loss of my mom and what that did to me. I was growing up, I was 11 years old, and it was so sudden. She died from breast cancer. I didn't have any other family to take care of me. But it hit hard because she was my rock. She taught me everything I knew. One of the things I really took from that was culinary arts. She was always in the kitchen cooking for all of 11 of us. That was her place of business, I guess you can say. I took away a lot from that. It taught me stability. It taught me if you wanted to something, you had to go work for it. And so that's what I did. I got my education in culinary arts. I'm a proud owner of an associate's degree. I used that to get me to where I am today. It was actually like my surfboard, I guess you can say, since we're in LA. I needed an opportunity to find warmth in this situation, and that's what I did. I followed it in her footsteps, and it brought me to where I am today. I want to talk a little bit about March 13th of 2016. I moved here to LA. I had no family, not one friend, no money. But I had a vision, and I know if I worked hard enough, I can do something with my life. So I stayed on the streets for a while, of Studio City, South Central, some parts of Van Nuys, all in different parks. But every morning I would go up and I would make sure I did something productive with my day. I didn't want to live that life. I feel like some people can get too comfortable. That wasn't me. I met someone from Hope of the Valley. I needed to take a shower. And they told me about this place called the Village Family Services. They have an outreach program. You know what they did for me? They came and picked me up. I had no bus money. They came and picked me up, gave me a place to shower, some food on my from my table. I don't have a table, from my stomach. They really opened arms for me. And I couldn't recognize anyone. I didn't know anyone, but someone, a program, a nonprofit could do that for me. It really, opened my eyes to, there was help for me, I didn't feel so alone. The Village Family Services has done so much for me. July 1st of 2016, I remember I was staying in a park and I had nothing. I was hungry and I walked into this place and they told me, you don't have to worry anymore. Just come here with your bags packed. We got you. And that's all I remember. After that, it's all a blur. But I ended up moving into Kittredge housing, and it's a housing for young men who are able to sustain a living by themselves. And that's what I did. I found a job. I started working. Things started to look up for me. I had my rough patches, as you guys know. I went through trauma when I lost my mom. But the Village, they ended up showing me a psychiatrist I could see, giving me a mental stability. Without these resources, I don't know where I would be today. As you can see, I feel like I have everything I need. I'm on my feet, But without this, it wouldn't be possible. I was very dark. It was very dark for me. Transportation is a big thing for me. I have the motivation to go out and get a job. It's something that I strive for, especially in the culinary art field. But getting to these places, it's very difficult. Walking in LA, no one does that anymore, especially with the heat. So, I was lost. But they started giving me bus tokens. Hey, use these two for this way. On the way back, you can grab more. And that really showed me that there was people who cared. People who, if you don't have it, we have it for you. And that's what I didn't have growing up. Being alone out on the streets, you don't really think people care. But as I can see the turnout here today, people care. So thank you. Homelessness is a national epidemic. It's not just you lost your wife, you're on drugs. I was very unfortunate. I lost my mom, but I still had, motivation. And the people from the Village Family Service have really helped me out, and I just want to say thank you. I'm done. Appreciate you, and hopefully we can cure this disease we have going on here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moultrie. Thank you for sharing your experience, and thank you for giving us inspiration that what sometimes seems like an absolutely intractable, insoluble problem has solutions if we just work hard enough to find them. So thank you very much. So we're going to move on to our panel of speakers now. And I think it's great to have folks from the city and county here, because a lot of times one of the frustrations that I think many people have with this issue is nobody's quite sure who's responsible for what. And believe me, that even within government, we sometimes, question that and try to wrestle with that. But essentially, the county is principally responsible for providing a lot of the social services issues around homelessness. The city is primarily responsible for housing and land use kinds of issues, but there's a lot of overlap. And so for the first time in the last couple of years, the city and the county are really working closely together. They've both created a homelessness master plan. They're finding shared direction. And I'm really pleased to have the leaders from both the city and the county here. And so I'd like to first start by introducing Peter Lynn, who is the Executive Director of the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, or LAHAA, which you'll hear a lot about. LAHAA is an agency that delivers services and that contracts for services and outreach. It's a combination of responsibility of both the city and the county to support LAHAA, and the head of the agency, Peter Lynn, is here with us. Peter?
You want me to start, or should you?
Yeah, no, go right in.
Good evening. I don't think I'm live. Am I live? No?
Bring it closer,
Okay.
and they'll bring it louder.
Can you hear me now? Okay, great. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and I really appreciate the creation of this forum. And the turnout is really amazing. I'm very appreciative of your interest and your willingness to turn out in the evening to talk about this critical subject. Moultrie, thank you for sharing that story. That was Moultrie, I just wanted to thank the gentleman who spoke before for sharing his story. I am also a New Yorker, transplanted out here, and I was not living in a park, but I slept in my car when I first got out here looking for work, and it's a rough place. It's nowhere like what the gentleman just faced. Thank you. So LAHAA, as the council member indicated, is a joint powers authority. We are a government agency that's created by contributions from the city and the county. We have responsibilities for administering local homeless assistance programs that are funded by the city and by the county, and we also administer and apply for homeless assistance grant funding from the federal government on an annual basis. I think you may have seen the news. We just got our award for the application that we put in the fall. We got $108 million worth of program funding for homelessness, including $13 million for new permanent supportive housing that will support 828 units of permanent supportive housing in Los Angeles. It's countywide. One of the responsibilities that we have, which is coming up next week, I hope you have all signed up for the homeless count in the San Fernando Valley. Please, if you have not, please go to the website, theycountwillyou.org. Pick a site. You can deploy to any neighborhood you want, your own neighborhood. Obviously, you can deploy to another one if that one is full. It's a great opportunity to see other parts of Los Angeles and also to assist with a countywide effort, also a nationwide effort. Every community in America does the same count in the last 10 days of January so we can get a clear picture of what's happening with homelessness across the country. So we don't have the results from this one. We haven't actually done it yet. So we have, what I'm going to share with you are just some data to get some, a quick sense of perspective on what it is. Obviously, the council member just shared with you there are 34,000 people in the city of Los Angeles at the last count, 57,000 countywide. If you look at this slide, this is an illustration of the change between the count in 2016 and the count in 2017. So 28,500 the year before, 34,000 last year. That's a growth of about 20%. A significant increase in people experiencing homelessness. Countywide, the increase was about 23%. So the city was a little less than countywide, both serious increases. The bars indicate, the color of the bars indicate the sheltered and unsheltered portions of those counts. Unsheltered people comprise about 75%, last year 76%, or 74% of the people experiencing homelessness across the city of Los Angeles. We had a slight increase in the number of shelter beds, the provision of shelter, so that's why the percentage changed slightly. But most people in Los Angeles experience homelessness in an unsheltered environment. That is inclusive of people living in their cars, people living in RVs, people living in vans, also people living in tents and makeshift dwellings, encampments. That all falls into the category of unsheltered for the purpose of the count. Sheltered beds include all the infrastructure that we have in terms of shelters, family shelters, youth shelters, single adults. It also includes motel voucher programs that may be operated for temporary use. So just looking at the flip side of it, which is where we're actually putting people into housing, we are continuing to accelerate the number of people that we're placing into housing. Last year in the city of Los Angeles, 9,400 people placed into permanent housing. There's an increase over the year before. Countywide, it was about 14,200, an increase of about 20%. We are placing more people into housing, more people are falling into homelessness at the same time. Just looking at the city by council district, Council District 2 was about 12% increase in the count. That is obviously lower than the citywide average. This is just looking, we've highlighted out the other valley council districts just to give a perspective of where things were. Now, there were some decreases and there were some, less than average increases in the valley. That is inclusive, you have to remember that the year before had been a marked increase over that. So things tend to sort of move over time. Encampments move, between counts, and people move around. It's not a static situation, but this is a citywide problem. This is a countywide problem. a few characteristics within here, and this is looking at the City of Los Angeles data as a whole. Service Planning Area 2, which is the San Fernando Valley, but it also goes all the way up to Santa Clarita and includes out to Malibu. So it's that's a broader area than just the San Fernando Valley, and of course CD2. So total population increase in the CD was about 12%. But the largest increase of all was with individuals. So that's single adults and not the chronically homeless portion. We've actually reduced the number of people who are chronically homeless. We're focused on getting that population into permanent supportive housing. In addition, the number of families also went down, and that's an effort by our family system to try to get folks into shelter. There's a great increase in the sheltered families as opposed to unsheltered families, and also to get them housed. Children in families, if you look at the number on the city side, even though the family members as a whole went down, children went up. So larger families were presenting in experiencing homelessness in the city as a whole. One of the questions that came out the folks were asking sort of where are these folks coming from? And I think there's a tendency to think that this is an imported problem. This is not an imported problem. This is a Los Angeles problem. If you look at how long folks have been here, the vast majority of them have been here more than 10 years. 57% more than 20 years. They've been here their whole lives. You get down to only 12% are less than a year. Okay, these are people who have been here very long. Actually, if you sort of plot that against people who are housed across Los Angeles, they actually more local than housed folks. The other question that we ask, so in addition to the point in time count, we're out in the neighborhoods and identifying people on the streets and sidewalks. We do demographic surveys, because obviously that just gives you a sort of head count. How many tents, how many cars, how many people. We do thousands of demographic surveys at the same time to get rich information about who these folks are, what their characteristics are, and what their needs are. We ask the question, where were you last stably housed? So again, overwhelming majority of them right here in Los Angeles County. Now, these two data elements are countywide data. There's about another 10% from other parts of California, about 17 out of state, and 2 or 3% out from. But the vast majority of folks were last stably housed here. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean that people were homeless someplace else and opted to be homeless in Los Angeles. People come here to make it and don't. It's a hard place to make it. It's very expensive. So getting stably housed is not the easiest thing in the world. And it's getting harder, obviously. As the council member indicated, the housing market in Los Angeles is the worst in America. We have the lowest vacancy rates. We have the highest overcrowding stats. We have the enormous numbers of very low-income people paying more than half their income for rent. It's a very, very challenging rental market. I don't have to tell renters that. You all know that. But as the council member indicated, folks on fixed income, folks at minimum wage, people who are in gray market economy jobs, their incomes are not moving nearly as fast as rents are. And they're the folks who are getting put the pressure on, that get squeezed out of the market. It is, at core, homelessness is a housing problem. That is the number one driver. When we ask folks, what was the cause of your becoming homeless? More than half indicate it was housing economics. Housing economics. There's a large chunk of people who have serious mental illness. It's a serious issue. That itself is not the cause. More people with serious mental health issues are housed. Vast majority of people with serious mental illness are housed. Vast majority of people with serious substance abuse issues are housed. But folks with those issues are very, very likely to become homeless if they're experiencing housing instability. Okay, and they're very, very vulnerable to disruptions in family connections, and that's the key issue. First-time homeless in Los Angeles is the majority of the people that we talk to. So 60% of the people report that they're in their first episode of homelessness. Now, the average amount of time that was 4 years. So people fall in here and have a hard time getting out. That is one of the key factors that we're going to interrupt with the new resources from Measure H and building the housing through Prop Triple H and the rest of the resources that are going out there. This is the key stat that we need to interrupt to get people rapidly rehoused, get them out of their first-time homeless so they don't become chronically homeless. 8,000 Angelenos we interviewed last year they had fallen into homelessness that year, and it was their first episode of homelessness. But then 22,000 were still in their first episode of homelessness, been there, for longer than that. So this is a pretty stark, indication of needing to get people out of homelessness. This is the denominator here. If you're looking at the total at the bottom at 36,000, it's unsheltered. This is just interviewing the unsheltered folks. We don't ask the same question of the people in the shelters. Like I said, please volunteer for the count. It's taking place next week. Most folks wait until the last minute to register. It would be helpful if you didn't. Theycountwillyou.org. And happy to entertain questions as we go forward.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you, Peter. And by the way, I just want to reemphasize the importance of this homeless count, because having the accurate data is the first part of finding the solutions. And the more we identify homeless population right here in our area, the more likely we are to get the resources that we need to be able to address that issue as well. So if you can, it's a great way to volunteer and be part of the solution. All right, so next, I'd like, as I mentioned, the county is moving forward on its master plan. The city's moving forward on its master plan. So I want to next invite to speak and welcome the manager of the Los Angeles County Homeless Initiative, Jerry Ramirez. Jerry, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Again, my name is Jerry Ramirez. I'm from the County of Los Angeles, Chief Executive Office from the Homeless Initiative Division. And I was asked to come here to speak to you about, what is the county doing to address homelessness? And so, as the councilman mentioned earlier, the county is responsible for most of the social services to provide those most in need. And the county has always provided services to homeless individuals, but it wasn't done in a coordinated fashion. And so in the summer of 2015, with the problem growing and our board of supervisors, our 5 board of supervisors, decided something needs to be done. So what they did is they launched what they called the Homeless Initiative. It brought together a team of county professionals, and the directive was come back in 6 months and provide us with a comprehensive set of strategies on how to combat homelessness. So it was a team of 5. I was one of them, and it was led by our director, our current director, Phil Ansell. And so we had 6 months to come up with a plan. And I remember the first day, the first meeting, there was a whiteboard, nothing on it. And our director says, I don't know what we're going to do or how we're going to do it, but we're not going to do it alone. We're going to be open. It's going to be an open process, and we're going to collaborate. And so based on those principles, we worked with service providers. We worked with the city of Los Angeles very closely, with other cities, with the faith community, with business, philanthropy, and people with lived experience. And during those 6 months, we met, we had 18 policy summits, we had 2 large public events, and at the end of it, we had 47 strategies. 47 comprehensive strategies that deal with homelessness at every angle. And so in February of 2016, our Board of Supervisors approved those 47 strategies. And on that same day, the city of LA approved their plan. So that was kind of a symbolic gesture where both the city and the county, working together during this process, approved their respective plans. On that same day that the County Board of Supervisors approved those 47 strategies, they also approved $100 million in one-time funding to begin implementation. At the same time, they also asked our homeless division team to look at different options for ongoing revenue because, as you know, $100 million is a lot of money, but it's just a small amount to deal with such a huge problem. And so in December of 2016, the Board of Supervisors approved Measure H to be on the March ballot. And so on March 7th, I believe, I always get that mixed up, 7th or 8th, the residents of LA County voted 70% in favor of Measure H, which is a 1/4-cent sales tax for those funds to be used solely to address and combat homelessness. And so we needed a 2/3 vote to get that done. And as you know, March is a very conservative election with very few people, the low percentage of voters who turn out. But with 70%, I think that really says something. That says that, the public really wants to do something about this. And so it wouldn't have been successful if it wasn't for the public will and also the political will. And so, we talk about these big plans, government comes up with another plan. Is it really going to succeed? Well, just 10 years prior to our plan that that the board approved 2 years ago, there was another plan that the county did. And it had nice glossy cover and it had all these pages and nothing really happened. And so I think the important difference between what happened 12 years ago and what happened 2 years ago in the approval of our plans and working together is the political will of our Board of Supervisors and our council, LA City Council. And so another important thing, too, is the collaboration between the county and the city in really addressing this issue. I mean, Meg is with the city. I see her at least 3 to 4 times every month in policy meetings. We're really trying to tackle the issue. And it's the support of the city and all the other cities, all the other 87 cities, to make it work. And I know I only have a minute left, so I guess I really can't get into all the type of services that we have. But we do have our website where we have all our strategies listed. It's homeless.lacounty.gov. You can find the type of services that we provide. You can even find out how much money we're providing, allocating to each of those strategies. In addition, there's also some outcome data and opportunities for you to kind of get involved in the process. But I just would like to thank the councilman for inviting us here. The partnership with the city is important, and we're looking forward to continue that partnership and your involvement as well. So thank you for the invitation, Councilman.
Very much, Jerry. Thank you, Jerry. By the way, before we get to our next speaker, there's so many people who are standing right now. I just wanted to also let you know that right across the hall, there's an overflow room where we're projecting everything. So if you'd rather sit, you have the option over there. So it's a good problem to have. All right. So our next speaker is the homeless coordinator for the city of Los Angeles, Meg Barclay. Meg, welcome.
Going to sit up straight. Thank you for that introduction and for having me here tonight. My name is Meg Barclay. I am the homeless coordinator for the city of LA. My job was actually created when the city passed its homeless strategy in February of 2016 as well. Our strategy there's 64 strategies within our overall homeless strategy across 8 categories. And 2 of those categories alone, housing and land use, comprise 24 of those strategies. And but really, there are so many different city departments that have a role in implementing these strategies that the city council and the mayor wanted to create a position whose sort of job it was to have the overarching picture of what all those departments are doing towards the implementation. And so that's a big part of my job, is keeping track of where all these another 62 active strategies, where they are, where the departments are in implementation, what kind of assistance that they need to move those strategies forward. Since the strategy was adopted, as Jerry mentioned, the county, they allocated $100 million of one-time funding. So did the city of LA when the strategy was adopted, and that allowed us to support the establishment of the coordinated entry system, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. Also establish new outreach teams, new shelter beds, rapid rehousing, other types of services designed to assist people who are experiencing homelessness, which resolving their homelessness. But I think one of the great things about the way that the city has changed and the county have changed how we're allocating services is that coordinated entry system, where before, I think you had service providers all over the county doing really, really great work, but with their own waiting lists and their own outreach teams and their own basically like separate systems of care, which then a person who's homeless has to try and navigate all on their own. So they're trying to go around and get on whatever waiting list they can. This way we have one central way of assessing people's needs and a central way of assigning people to resources, so that the work is on us to be able to navigate people to the solutions, and it's much more efficient, and it's a better use of the resources that the city and the county are allocating. And that was a really big push in the first part of the year for both the city and the county, was to fund and really start to build the CES coordinated entry system countywide. But also along the lines of the housing and the those 24 strategies, I would say the city also put up a bunch of, 12 parcels of city-owned land for development of permanent supportive housing, where our contribution to the project is a lot of the land value, which is not, as you know, in Los Angeles, a cheap thing, but also that also helps to distribute those resources around the city. And also things like landlord incentives. So even if you have a Section 8 voucher in the city of Los Angeles, it's hard to get a landlord to accept that voucher. And because you are going to that landlord to take that voucher, and somebody else who doesn't have Section 8 is wanting that same unit. So this allows us to give some kinds of damage mitigation, and other types of incentives to landlords to hold the unit, for instance, while a homeless person is getting their documentation together, things like that, to make it easier for people to access units. But of course, Proposition HHH is the biggest accomplishment in the first year of the strategy implementation. That's a $1.2 billion housing bond that was approved by 77% of voters in November of 2016. We also needed 2/3, so we definitely cleared that bar. But something that's really amazing about Proposition HHH is in the 2 months after it was approved, we had regulations and a process for allocating the funding. We built 2 new programs in 2 months after it was approved. And 2 months after that, we had recommendations for the first $89 million bond issuance. And that was 9 permanent supportive housing projects, 615 units, 416 of which are permanent supportive housing, and 6 facilities. So those are facilities providing services that are not permanent housing. And that's $89 million within the first 6 months of recommendations of projects that would not have been funded had it not been for Proposition HHH. And we anticipate a larger issuance coming up in this next year. So we've been moving quickly. It's not a small thing that we were able to design and implement a new program in less than a year. And I would say also, the other thing that's really great about the funding that both the city and the county allocated in that first year is it's allowed us to implement these 2 measures much more quickly. Measure H is funding a lot of those programs that we got off the ground with that initial infusion of money. And so we would be a year behind, basically, if we hadn't done that in the first year of the strategy implementation by both the city and the county. So we definitely are feeling the urgency. We're moving as quickly as we can. It takes a while to build new things and to start to see the fruits of those labors. But there is a lot of work. There's a lot of work happening, represented by the people sitting here at this table, and so many more service providers and departmental staff all over the city and the county of LA. But we're really happy to be here tonight to tell you about that.
Thank you very much, Meg. Our next speaker is the Chief Impact Officer with the nonprofit service provider, LA Family Housing, John Horn. John, welcome.
Yes, thank you. So yes, thank you for having me here tonight. I appreciate this. Just a little bit about myself. I turned 50 this past April, and I'm born and raised San Fernando Valley. This is my home, live in Granada Hills, and I've been doing this work on ending homelessness for 25 years now. And I work for LA Family Housing. I also work for Northeast Valley Health Corporation, both out of, at the time, the Valley Shelter in North Hollywood. So I'm very familiar with North Hollywood. It's a second home. I spend a lot of time here. So Thank you. There's a lot of work to do. So LA Family Housing, we are the largest provider of services to homeless individuals and families in Service Planning Area 2. We also are the lead agency for the coordinated entry system that was just spoken about by Meg for individuals and families. So we are the lead agency in coordinating those two bodies. And the Village Family Services is the lead agency for the youth system. And our role as that lead is to coordinate not only the services we provide as an agency, but to coordinate the response both of the providers and the outreach teams that are doing work within our area. And we have been effective in that. We have one of the most effective coordinated entry systems of all of our service planning areas, of which there are 8 in our county. And we're very proud of that. We have a unified approach among our agencies. One of the things that coordinated entry system was designed to do was to get agencies to work together. And we were happy to report that our agencies here in the San Fernando Valley and Santa Clarita Valley Partnership have been working together long before CES came to pass. So we have a huge history of collaboration, and no more is that shown than in the Homeless Connect Days that the council member spoke of earlier. These are events that we now do on a monthly basis. These have been events prior to 2017 that were held on a quarterly basis. Starting last year, we did them monthly. And we do them on a rotating schedule and bring together a partnership of providers, volunteers, and our elected. So CD2 has hosted 2 of these events last year, and they'll be hosting 2 more this year. These are great events. We held one today in Councilmember Blumenfield's district in Winnetka, and had the In-N-Out truck there providing services to 200 people. It was very popular. A lot of people came today just for that, and also to be connected to services, so we're fortunate with that. Now I need to stop, but the last thing I just want to say, as I said, I've been doing this work for a long time. In my time of doing this work and dealing with homelessness, no more has it ever been so severe as it is now. And at the same time, we have never had the resources committed to this problem as we do now. It's something to think about.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you for your work. So, homelessness is predominantly a social issue, not a law enforcement issue, and yet I think if you'll look around this room, you'll see the seriousness with which the Los Angeles Police Department takes this issue. And before I introduce our next speaker, I do want to recognize that we have the Los Angeles Police Department Chief of the San Fernando Valley, Deputy Chief Sherman, is here with us. The LAPD Chief in charge of Metro Enforcement, Chief Green, is here with us. We have North Hollywood Captain Don Graham is here, and Van Nuys Captain Lillian Carranza, I saw. I think, oh, there she is in the back. And Captain Barclay, I think, is here from Van Nuys as well. And we have many other officers. We have our HOPE officers. We have our SLOs here, who you'll see. We also have our Park Ranger, Albert Torres, here. And CHP is represented by Leland Tang. LADOT Parking, represented by Lieutenant Hartman. And LA Fire Department is here as well. Inspectors Arona and Elsie are here. So this is a big turnout of, the brass of our public safety agencies who take this issue very seriously. But the person who's at sort of the point of the spear on that is our next speaker, Commander Dominic Choi. Commander Choi.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And so the question, law enforcement, what role do we play in homelessness? That's a great question. Our traditional role has always been enforcement, arrest somebody, and go to court and testify. So homelessness, obviously, as you heard, is a very complicated issue. First, some of the resources that LAPD dedicates to the homeless effort are obviously our HOPE teams, which I think most of you are aware of, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But we also have reset officers in Skid Row We have our beach detail officers in Venice Beach. We have a tab unit in Hollywood. And of course, we have our senior lead officers that are dealing with this issue every day, day in and day out. So we have a significant amount of resources dedicated to homelessness, even though our role is only enforcement. I say only enforcement because we're not here to arrest our way out of this problem. We can't do it. My primary role as the homeless coordinator for LAPD is to provide oversight for the HOPE teams. I have other duties, but that's my primary role. So what the HOPE teams are, there are three components. There's a LAHAA component, which does the housing and outreach. There's a sanitation component that does the cleanups. And then there's LAPD that provides force protection for all the workers, as well as enforcement on an as-needed basis. So that's kind of the platform. Again, we're not here to arrest our way out of this problem, but we are here to provide support for our city and county partners to assist them in doing their jobs safely. And that's really our effort in the homeless picture. That ideally, that's what it is. I will tell you that our officers are out there on a daily basis talking to these individuals, identifying if they need resources, and actually finding them the resources, putting them in shelters, and being that social worker. Here's the thing, that's not part of the model, but I will never tell my officers not to help somebody, because that's what we're here for. And that's really it. We have a lot of resources. We work closely with our partners, and I'll be happy to answer questions as we move on.
Thank you, Commander. In addressing this challenge of homelessness, there's an awful lot of legal intricacies that come into play. And our great city attorney, Mike Feuer, a longtime friend of mine and colleague in this effort, has devoted considerable attention and resources to this issue. And within the city attorney's office, the person who is the director of homelessness policies and strategies with the LA City Attorney's Office is here with us. Our next speaker, Guillermo Neal. Welcome, Guido.
And thank you again, all of you, for coming out. I know it's late and it's already 8 o'clock, so I'll try and be fast. I just want to give you an overview of what our office does, because I really do think that helps people understand the complexities of the homeless issue. Our office is both divided into criminal and civil. So on our criminal side, we do regular misdemeanor cases, and we also have some really dynamic out-of-the-box programs that are probably the first in the nation in a lot of ways. The City Attorney, Mike Feuer, is really trying to balance holding people accountable and also providing diversion programs that really help get people the help they need. We have a heart clinic, which if any of you go to the Homeless Connect days, usually our lawyers are there. They work on people's infraction tickets. Some people have different kind of tickets that are holding them back from housing or different things. We help get rid of those with the help of service providers in each neighborhood. We have a neighborhood justice program, which is a diversion program. We just recently got a $6 million grant for a very unusual mobile diversion program that's aimed at Prop 47 defendants, and it's a comprehensive health-based drug intervention program. It's really, really dynamic. It's in a pilot phase in South Bureau. Hopefully, if it works, we can get more money and take it citywide. It really tries to hit people in the root of where their issues are before having to arrest them and create a criminal history on them. We also have one of our best programs in our office is the Neighborhood Prosecutor Program. I'm sure many of you know your neighborhood prosecutor for Van Nuys Division, Tamara Golotson. She's done an amazing program called Clean Slate, where she takes people who have misdemeanor cases or tickets that are open and they're afraid to go and get services. She works with service providers and helps on all those cases to reach a resolution that's great for the individual, for the community, and helps the service providers keep people on track. We also have Todd Gilman, who's sitting in the second row here. He's your neighborhood prosecutor. If you want to raise your hand up, Todd. Todd is the neighborhood prosecutor for North Hollywood. He's been here probably 4 months or so. He can already tell you just heart-wrenching stories about different cases he has to work on to try and make your neighborhood safer. He works hand-in-hand with North Hollywood Division and really treating people like individuals and really trying to help the communities, help people that are troubling them get help that they need. But it's really sad and it's really difficult work. So it's a great job. Our office also gives civil legal advice to the Department of Sanitation, LAPD, every civil agency out there. We do training, and we also do civil litigation. Sometimes you can turn something negative into positive, and one thing that came out of one of our many litigation on homeless issues was the bin, and Nicole Carcel is here from our office, and she did I think the only voluntary storage place in the entire city, which is in Skid Row, which provides a lot of voluntary area for storage in the city, and she did that. So it was pretty amazing to come out of litigation, so there's something positive. And it really goes to show you how much the city attorney's office is really trying to help on this issue. Mike Feuer created my position, I think 6 or 7 months ago. I work exclusively on homeless issues, both on the civil and criminal side, and really trying to work with all the council offices, with the mayor's office, trying to get more crisis beds out there, more storage. We're trying to help with the safe parking. That's a huge issue also in LA, and I see Scott Sales is back here too. He has a booth because it's really important to try and get alternatives for people because, as the commander said, we can't arrest our way out of it, and we need to have different places for people to go. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Geeta. Thank you for your great work, and Todd as well. So I know many of the concerns that a lot of you have and that will be reflected in the questions involve hygiene and public health and sanitation. And so with us today is the Senior Environmental Inspector with LA Sanitation's Clean Streets Program, Gonzalo Barrica. Gonzalo, welcome.
Good evening. Thank you, Councilman Krekorian and audience, for having me here. Again, I'm Gonzalo Barriga. I'm representing Los Angeles Sanitation, and I work in the Environmental Quality Program that houses the Clean Streets Initiative. Our mission is to protect public health and the environment, and that's our focus, and that's what we set out to do every day. Some of the programs in sanitation include the Solids Waste Program, Clean Water, Environmental Compliance, to name a few. In the Clean Streets Initiative program, we perform several tasks. We do posted homeless encampment cleanups. We process the homeless encampment cleanups authorizations in order to perform the cleanups. We do illegal dumping cleanup. We do illegal dumping enforcement. We've also been tasked by City Council and assigned as a designated administrative agency for LAMC 5611, which is personal property that's stored in the public right-of-way. So some of the things that we would do for that would be basically identifying locations where there would be violations and seeing how we can get the individual to comply. And if there's no individual present, moving forward with some kind of a compliance mitigation effort. Some of the resources that we currently have is approximately 4 teams, and we just added a 5th team to do major cleanups citywide. We also have an Operation Healthy Streets in downtown in the Skid Row area that we clean there 4 times a week, major cleanups, and we also go to Venice and do cleanups there every Friday. Citywide, we have 4 HOPE teams, and that is our public right-of-way enforcement teams. So they're a little different. They don't do major cleanups. They do compliance. So their mission is to go around and making sure people that have personal property in the public right-of-way are in compliance with LAMC 5611. We just recently added 2 more teams, a LA River team and a citywide team that we just had a soft launch last week with. And we're pretty excited about those resources and the implementation and how we can supplement our staff in the field. And I'll leave it there for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gonzalo. And that's actually a great segue into our first batch of questions because, as I mentioned at the outset, we got, I think, around 100 questions from all of you over the last few months that we've been promoting this event. Many of them covered the same ground, so as I say, we've tried to consolidate them. And we'll get through as many as we can. But as I said also, if your question doesn't get answered, submit it on a card, submit it through our website, and we will try to answer every single question that you submit. So the first group of questions that I have here all involve encampments. So let's start off with that. First question is, what are the laws on camping on public land, such as county washes, Caltrans property, sidewalks, and LA River? And maybe Gita, if you'd like to start with that, and Jerry or others who want to weigh in as well.
So really, when you look at some of the laws that deal with property, you look at the property owner. So it really depends on who owns the property and what sort of law you can enforce. LAPD can enforce on a wide variety of properties. But if you look at, for example, there's a penal code section on illegal lodging. So really, you're not supposed to live anywhere on any public land. Balancing that in our city, we have a municipal code that the council passed, which is LAMC 5611, and that deals with public property. That deals with property in the public area. And so in our city, we're taking a balance to that due to some litigation and due to also proactive council legislation about trying to balance the rights of the people who courts have told us we don't have enough shelter or enough homes, to balance their need to sleep somewhere at night and the residents' need to have sidewalks open, to have businesses open, to have their driveways free of people. So there's a balance in the different laws that are out there as our city has interpreted them. In the LA River specifically, it is a patchwork of different entities that own and control that land. The sanitation team and LAPD has done a great job, along with mostly the council offices leading the way in encampment cleanups, of trying to get together all of the city agencies that are involved, from Army Corps of Engineer, there's Rec and Parks property, and Chief Torres is great with that, in trying to cobble together an enforcement plan that does outreach and enforcement together. So it really is a lot of different laws that involve on each property.
Thank you. So many people want to know, because we see them every place, constituents want to know, what's the process for reporting a homeless encampment, number one, and number two, why does it take so long to remove an encampment? Gonzalo, that sounds like it's right up your alley.
Thank you, and thank you for that question. So first, it starts off with a notification. LA Sanitation needs to be notified that there's an issue there. And that comes normally through My 311, a interactive application on your phone, or a phone call to 311. Also, there is referrals from other departments, LAHAA, LAPD, park rangers, for instance, and we begin the process that way. We also make an effort to do a proactive quarterly street indexing, where we get eyes on the street as to where homeless encampments are, among other things. So once that notification is made, we have to begin a process that has been kind of mandated or provided that LA Sanitation follows in order to move forward with the homeless encampment cleanup. And there's a couple of stages to that. And the first one is we need to verify that it is a homeless encampment. And we have a definition for a homeless encampment, and that's a location where one or more individuals live and or store property in an unsheltered area. So if it meets that definition, then we can call it a homeless encampment. Then we need to identify if at that homeless encampment there's a health hazard, there's 5611 violations, and if so, then we will move forward with a cleanup. So in order to do the cleanup, we've been mandated to notify LAHAA and begin a process of an authorization. LAHAA is notified, and then they have to go out to the location and provide education, outreach to the individual or individuals there, and they try to make 3 attempts. Once those attempts are completed, they sign off on the authorization, and then it moves on to the next step. Our chief of the environmental enforcement and compliance then makes a determination if it is the public right-of-way. If it indeed is city-owned or managed property, then he will sign off on the authorization. And lastly, our Board of Public Works president will sign off to give us the official notification to move forward. Once that's completed, and that can take approximately 2 to 3 weeks, we then have to schedule the cleanup and then post the cleanup. So scheduling depends. You heard the resources we have citywide. We have 4 to 5 teams for the entire city. So there's certain times that we're in certain CDs. Based on that, then we schedule a cleanup. We have to post the location 24 hours in advance, no more than 72 hours. After 72 hours, the posting is expired and we have to start the process over again. Once it's posted, then we will come on the morning of and we will perform a cleanup. We will do a hard closure. And after a warning and a 15-minute notification, no one will be allowed back in that area. And we will move forward with health hazard determinations and impounding of property and storing property or discarding property according to the policies and procedures in law. Once that's done, we open up the area and we leave it open to the public. So it's a pretty lengthy process, but we try to complete it in approximately 3 weeks.
And just to put a little context into it, the reason that we are subjected to that lengthy process is because of constitutional litigation that has happened over the years targeting the city, because of situations that have happened in some jurisdictions and happened right here in Los Angeles, where, for example, some homeless veteran got, moved out and all of his medals were disposed of, and, other things like that, where advocates and their attorneys filed litigation, and these are the kinds of constraints that they have to operate under in order to ensure that we're operating in a constitutional fashion and taking someone's goods. And Gonzalo, maybe you can speak a little bit about what you encounter when you do those sorts of cleanups, and how you make the determinations of what is actual property and what is litter and what is, hazardous material that you have to deal with in a different way.
Thank you. So to touch on the legalities, everything that we have done and our protocols in the ordinance, which is LAMC, Los Angeles Municipal Code 5611, has been a coordinated effort from several agencies, LAPD, City Attorney's Office, council members' offices, mayor's office, and basically it came up with a policy. We have a policy to implement 5611, and the City Attorney's Office weighed in heavily on how and when and how we can perform cleanups. And that policy was based on several lawsuits and stuff, and if Guido would like to speak to that, we can talk about that. But regarding the cleanups, so we have environmental compliance inspectors. Some of our environmental compliance inspectors basically get to be, if they meet all the standards and requirements in the training, they become public officers. All of them are hazmat technician or hazmat specialists certified through the state of California. We begin a process called a health hazard assessment when we do a cleanup. And based on that health hazard assessment, property is either defined as soiled by whatever the contaminant is, or clean. If it's clean, the property will be packed in a bag and taped up and basically on a chain of custody and sent for storage so that the homeless person at the location can retrieve it at the impound location. If it is a health hazard, there's several ways something could be a health hazard. It could be soiled with human waste. There could be vectors in it. It could be hazardous waste. It could be a hazardous substance. And all of these different types of definitions apply based on what we observe out there. And a lot of the training and certification our staff have give them the ability to make that decision on the stuff that we locate out there. And basically on those discretion of the individual and their training on the field, make those determinations on that property out there. So it's not no simple task. We have to itemize and discard and itemize everything that we impound.
It's an exceptional challenge for our city employees to be able to do that, and it's critically important because the courts have ordered us to store property. It's not as simple as bringing a skip loader in and just, dumping everything. Anything that is personal property belonging to a homeless person has to be tagged, identified, and stored, or else we'd be violating the Constitution and subject to additional litigation. So, Gita, I know a number of people have expressed to my office and in this context the concern that we go through all this trouble. Gonzalo does his cleanups with his crew. we see progress, and then a short time later, we see the same encampment coming up in the same place. So once an encampment is removed, what can be done to keep people from coming back to the same spot almost immediately after the cleanup?
Right. So as you know, you mentioned we're balancing people's civil rights and constitutional rights versus the residents' rights versus free passage and all of those. If some of the judges on our cases are not happy, they think we're doing way too much. And then you talk to residents and business owners and they think we're doing nothing. So we're kind of trying to balance that and always keeping the Constitution forthright. With them returning to the space in a perfect world, they would return, they wouldn't put their tents back up, which is illegal during the day. They would keep them down, they would keep the sidewalks clear, or if they put a tent up during the day in violation of the code, there would be plenty of officers and sanitation workers to come and remind them to take them down, and it would be great. But we live in a world where LAPD is really tasked with a lot of serious crime. You heard how many sanitation teams he has, so it's become very difficult. There's environmental changes that sometimes you can do to not have people move back as fast, but it really becomes a balancing act. And it's difficult because all the cleanups they do and the millions of dollars are being spent doesn't give one shelter bed or one more apartment for anyone to live in. So they're balancing what they're doing, trying to keep the sidewalks clean and the businesses open, and it's also the city and the county's job to help create shelter beds and storage and housing.
Well, and that's, I think, an important point, because we do the cleanup. Maybe some of the items that are the most offensive items to the surrounding community will be removed, but the people who were living there, where did they go after a cleanup? I mean, and I'm not asking that hypothetically. I mean, this is a real question. Those people who were living there, the next night are going to sleep someplace, and if they're not in a shelter, they're presumably going to be in another park or in another library or in another encampment that they begin to form if we don't have the more permanent solutions of shelter and housing. So Gonzalo mentioned My 311 as a point of entry for these sorts of complaints, and for those of you who use My 311, you can track progress that's being done. And someone asked Gonzalo, why is my 311 ticket marked closed when the homeless encampment I reported still remains?
Thank you for that question. I think we just kind of touched on it, but so every time you make a 311 ticket for a homeless encampment, sanitation tries to address what the appropriate tool is to that request for service. And sometimes it might be an individual with a cart. According to LAMC 5611, that individual can have a 60-gallon container in the public right-of-way as long as he's not in violation of some other blocking egress, ingress, ADA violation in the public right-of-way. That doesn't necessarily mean sanitation is going to come out and perform a cleanup. If there's an encampment blocking the sidewalk, there's health hazards, there's human waste, there's vectors, there's hazardous waste, there's accumulations, illegal dumping. Sanitation will move forward with the appropriate resource or tool to address that service request. Now, with the homeless encampments, if a request comes in, we went over what the lengthy process was. Once we perform the cleanup, we do close out that service request because we performed a public health and safety cleanup there. And we do collect photos before and after, and we have an itemized report of what was collected there. Once we perform that task in the field, we close that service request out. Otherwise, it stays open, and we have to show our work and just move on to the next service request. And so, if you feel that there's an issue with the homeless encampment, process, we're here. This forum is perfect for that. We'd like to hear your complaints and how we can address it, and also we'd like to also articulate to the audience our concerns and our issues with performing the cleanups. So we appreciate the question. We'll work on that. We will work better at providing information back to the person that puts in the service request, maybe provide pictures to them to show before and after cleanups. But again, after we perform a cleanup, it was to address public health and safety and environmental concerns. That individual's still there. So, yeah.
And it's also only on city property. So sometimes I've seen them get 311 complaints where it's actually not on city property, and they can only work on city property. So that might be an issue too. But you can call their office, your council office, the neighborhood prosecutor, give them the address, and we can help you go through the issues too.
So let's not lose that point, because in my district, that happens a lot, and especially around the river where you have multiple jurisdictions that are involved. So can someone speak to when that I mean, we can't expect a member of the public to look and see where the jurisdictional lines are on the map and determine who to call. So when we get that call, what happens? How is that information shared with the appropriate agency if LA-SAN is not the right one to do it?
Sure. I mean, what we usually do that I've seen it happen is when you're not getting the request and you start calling, like I'm calling my council member, I'm calling my neighborhood prosecutor, and we'll work through who the property owner is. If it's on private property, we can contact them. If they're still not going to clean up and they have an encampment, we can work with LAPD. They can help with if there's a trespass issue. If it's a vacant building, we can also work with building and safety on that and work with LAPD on that. So it really, if you're getting that and you're realizing it's in a patchwork, then you really have to talk to more. I mean, 311 is a great app. It's amazing, but you can talk to us too, and we can work through the property owner issue.
And likewise, that's what my office does on a daily basis. We take calls about issues that don't affect our district all the time, or that don't affect the city all the time. And my staff will figure out who the right agency is if you're not getting the responses that you're expecting. Commander Choi, did you want to? I saw you kind of raising your hand.
I think
Meg,
just
okay.
recently, actually, that on the 311 tickets, they get closed because they haven't determined it's an encampment that can be cleaned, or it's not on public property. They're also passing those locations onto LAHAA outreach teams as well, so that even if it's not eligible to be a part of the cleanup program, it is going to get some kind of attention from an outreach team, which may take longer, but that may get that person actually off the street. So that is, I think that's a newer piece, but it also gives the outreach teams more information to go on as far as locations of concern in the community.
Okay, thank you. So one of the big concerns that people have expressed, especially in recent weeks, is that some of the recent fires, as reported in the news, were started by people living in homeless encampments in high fire areas, especially in the Sepulveda Pass fire. So what is being done to protect hillside and high fire areas to ensure that we don't have a recurrence of that sort of thing? Commander Choi, do you want to start off with that?
I can start with this. So the fire department has convened a task force to address encampments in the very high fire severity zones. And a lot of that area is up here. And what they're doing is they're doing a survey of all the encampments in these high brush or high fire severity zone areas. They're mapping them out. Once they identify where they're at and then who the property owner is of where these encampments are, they're going to be sending certified letters out to these property owners. Now, a lot of it's going to be, Santa Monica Conservancy, MRCA, city, state, federal, different lands, but all within the city of Los Angeles. So send the letters out to provide notice that they have an encampment in their area and it's in a high fire zone. Once that's done, that mapping and notification list is made available to LAHAA, sanitation, and LAPD. We will, as a city family, will address all the encampment issues via our HOPE model in the city on city property. There are going to be some encampments on private property where the owner isn't aware that there's an encampment on the property. they will also be given letters. And in their letter or their packet, they're going to have an instruction sheet that says, you need to post your property, file trespass authorization with your local agency, and then we can come out and arrest the person or remove the person from that property. Also, if they just call us, we can respond and they can do a private person's arrest. Again, we're not here to arrest our way out of this this problem, but here's the thing. This is a public safety issue, and it's an extreme hazard if they're having warming fires or campfires there at night. So it's more about their safety and your safety and not about a homeless issue. So that's what's happening. The timeline on this, they should have, I think, everything mapped out and ready to send letters by late next week. All of us should have information to start addressing those issues or those encampments as early as within the next 2 weeks. So that's what's happening currently.
Thank you. Let me just add to that, because I was speaking to a homeowners association about a week ago, and some folks there were telling me that before this issue hit the news, they were reporting that there were actual encampments where there were some small fires happening in their neighborhood, and they were trying to get it dealt with, and it wasn't being dealt with. And so I want all of you to know what I told them, and I will tell you. If you are aware of those locations, any location like that where there's a threat of fire, please notify my office. And I already told the fire chief that I will be providing him with a list of those locations, and we'll be expecting that the fire department will address every one of those priority areas in our district. So, but you have to let us know that, because we may not be aware of the specific location if you don't directly call my office.
So you can do that, but also what I failed to mention is in about a week, part of my 311 app will include a section to report those encampments that you see in the high fire zones. So it'll alleviate some of the calls to you.
So that's great, but please do both, because I want to make sure that we follow up with the fire chief to ensure that those are taken care of, because you couldn't have a higher priority than ensuring that we don't have fires in the hills of Los Angeles right now. So, okay, we're going to move on next to vehicle dwelling, because in Council District 2, this is a major issue for neighborhoods all over the district. And I'd like to start, Gita, if you could just explain what the vehicle dwelling ordinance is in this city. Why do we have such an ordinance? And what is the city exploring ways to improve the ordinance? And how, I'm going to riff off of another question that I had. How does our situation with vehicle dwelling compare to smaller cities like that surround us, like Burbank and Glendale?
Okay, so we have a vehicle dwelling ordinance that regulates who can live in a vehicle. So not who can be parked in a vehicle or where you can be parked, but how you're actually dwelling in the vehicle, meaning LAPD needs evidence that you're living there day to day. There's a couple different things in the ordinance that LAPD can look at to prove that you're living there. So it's not a parking ticket. It actually goes to the conduct of the person in the vehicle. Los Angeles, for a long time, had a vehicle dwelling ordinance that said it was against the law to live in your vehicle. That law was struck down, and so for a while, if you might remember, we didn't have a rule, and so there wasn't any kind of regulation. And then the council office has passed a regulation. It's LEMC 8502, if you'd like to read it, and it regulates where you can park and the time you can park and dwell in a car. So not any sort of parking tickets. All the parking signs, restrictions still apply all over the city streets. You can't live in a vehicle between the hours of 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. on any residential street, or at any time within a one block radius of any edge of a lot containing a park or licensed school, preschool, or daycare facility. That can be really complicated to look at. We have maps. I think almost every police station has maps. The library has maps that have different colored zones on the street so people can see it more clearly. The penalties for violation of this is an infraction. It's an escalating scale, $25, $50, and $75. So that's the current state of the vehicle dwelling law. Within the ordinance that was passed, if you look at the council file, you'll also see there's the whereas clauses or preambles. And in that, the city says they're going to be trying to do a safe parking program. There is one in existence in CD9. That is the only one. Scott Sales' team is back there. They are looking for private property, churches, synagogues, what have you, to see if they will also have safe parking programs so that the residents can have some kind of a break from people parking in front of their houses, and the people in the vehicles can go to a safe place to park where they can get services and things like that.
I'm going to get to safe parking in a minute, but just so that we're clear, the vehicle dwelling ordinance that we used to have prohibited throughout the city dwelling in a vehicle, period. It was a violation of the law to live in your vehicle, thrown out by the courts. So once our ordinance was invalidated, we had zero ordinance. So you could sleep in any vehicle, anytime, anywhere in the city. So the ordinance that we have was a response to our previous ordinance being held unconstitutional and invalidated, and it attempts to comply with the Constitution so that we can enforce. And I want to go next to the enforcement of that, because it is a difficult issue, and then we'll come back to safe parking in a minute. So LAPD has, and this is a great frustration, again, of my constituents who call about this, but LAPD has had great difficulty enforcing the vehicle dwelling ordinance because they cannot enter the RV or vehicle, and they cannot get a signature from the dweller who lives there or permission to enter. So I guess so the question that people have is, why don't you just treat it like any other parking violation, where instead of having LAPD try to enforce this, why isn't it treated like parking violations? So Gita, I guess that's still you,
sure,
or Meg.
So it isn't a parking violation. It's a conduct of a person. So your car can get a parking ticket because it's parked in the wrong place or parked in the red. This is actually goes to conduct. So LAPD needs to prove several things before they're able to issue a ticket, and they need to have the individual sign the ticket. This isn't, the crime of the century, so they're not going to get a search warrant to go in the car. It really is a question of having enough evidence from LAPD to be able to prove the citation and the infraction.
Okay, so, and by the way, there's two issues. One is dwelling, one is illegal parking. So in many areas, we have had posted no overnight parking zones and so on. But in some cities, the entire city is a no overnight parking zone on the street. But the reason that we can't do that, Gita, I'm just going to summarize, you correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason that we can't do that is that in those cities, they give notice to anyone entering their city by posting signs at every place that you can enter the city that says no overnight parking in Burbank. How many entrances to the city of Los Angeles do we have?
Thousands and thousands.
Well over 2,000 entrances to the city of Los Angeles. So it's impossible for us to provide that kind of notification. So we have to do it on a block-by-block basis. And as you've experienced, I'm sure in some of your neighborhoods, we'll do that in one place, and then the problem will spring up, a quarter of a mile away in some other place. So the solution to that, as Gita addressed earlier, is through safe parking programs. And Santa Barbara has initiated a tremendously successful safe parking program. The idea being to get these vehicles out of neighborhoods and places where they have adverse impact into a place where the person who is living in their vehicle can be safe, can have some personal hygiene, can have some cleanliness to protect the public as well, and it takes the vehicle out of the neighborhoods at the same time. So Gita touched upon it. Meg, maybe you can talk about what Los Angeles needs still to do to get more safe parking programs going around our city so that we can address this problem substantively instead of through law enforcement.
So just to clarify, we have one city-funded safe parking program. There are other safe parking programs around the city that are operating without the support of city funding. One thing that we were able to do this year, though, is to get clarification from both planning and building and safety that that's allowed. There was a lot of confusion about what was allowed as far as overnight parking in parking lots that are established for businesses or things like that. And so you don't need to have special permission to have a safe parking program as long as you don't have other conditions on the property. And that took longer than we would have liked to clarify, but that has been clarified in writing now, which paves the way forward for establishing more safe parking programs. We do have a pilot that we are funding in South Los Angeles it's for families. It involves case management and a dedicated housing navigator. So that's been operating for about 6 months now. There is some more money in the budget that was just added to look at other types of programs, and LAHAA is working on identifying some sites for additional safe parking programs with different levels of service to see if they're as effective. But for families, we really wanted a housing navigator to get families out of their cars and into homes, and so that's why that particular program is very service enriched. But we are looking for other sites. Like a lot of things like this are very difficult to get neighborhoods to accept, and the same neighborhoods where cars are parking on the streets, looking for places where we can have them park in an organized way at night. So it has been difficult to identify sites for these, but we do have funding, and we are looking at other options for safe parking.
But look, folks, the choice is this. It can be the Wild West, where people are parking everywhere and doing whatever, or we can have some organization to this where there's some ability to have law enforcement, where there's an ability to have compliance with the law, where you can actually have places where they can, take care of their, hygiene issues and stuff, so that it isn't out in our streets. There's, the only alternatives are we either organize it or we leave it as the Wild West. And so if you have a business or a church or something else that we can implement a program like that, it works. It's worked in Santa Barbara. It can work here as well. But, we got to get people stepping up and willing to do it. Mm-hmm. Okay, I need to I'm going to try to pick up the pace here a little bit because we've got a lot still to cover. There's a category of questions that I'll sort of summarize together as why are homeless people allowed to sleep and block sidewalks and other public property? Why does it seem like homeless people have more rights than I do? We've been picking on you a lot, Gita, but it seems like that's up your alley. But anybody else who wants to weigh in on that, feel free.
It may seem like that, but again, it goes back to us trying to balance everyone's civil constitutional rights and the court decisions. People don't get to sleep in front of your doorway. People don't get to block your business. There are code sections on that. But unfortunately, again, it comes down to really being able to deploy people properly to do that enforcement. And then you're moving them from one doorway to another. So again, trying to get people to have a place to go. So if LAPD comes up on them and says, you got to move out of this doorway, they have a place for them to go. And that's really, I think, one of the key to do.
And if I can just add to that, you see them out there and you see them in violation of 5611 or other violations, but the officers are out there and they are doing the enforcement to the extent that they can. I just want to assure you of that. Here's some of the challenges. If you have an encampment, you have an individual there, and if you don't have the sanitation component with you, when this officer arrests this person, all that property has to go with them, right? So. Again, on this same message, we need more storage. We need places for them to sleep. We need places for them to park. So that's really the message that, if anything, that I hope everyone takes out of this.
All right. As long as you still have the mic, Commander Choi. Someone asks, what can I do about homeless people coming into my business and harassing patrons? What do I do if I don't get a response?
Okay. Well, the first part of that question, if somebody's in your business, and they're harassing patrons, if you ask them to leave and they don't leave, they're trespassing. Call the police, and you can make a private person's arrest for trespassing. There's also a Penal Code section 415, meaning they're harassing or disturbing the peace. They can be arrested or cited for that as well. The second part of that question, what if LAPD doesn't respond? I'd like to think that's not going to happen. Now, there may be a delayed response depending on the priority of the call, but I'd like to think they're going to respond. Now, if you have an individual that's in there day in and day out, and it's a chronic problem, it's the same person, and you're having to call every day, that's something a senior lead officer should take on as a community issue or business issue and work with you for a long-time solution. Have that person have the senior lead officer reach out to LAHAA or service workers, trying to understand how we can help this person and also help your business.
Great, thank you. Someone asks, Commander, why doesn't LAPD arrest homeless people who are doing drugs?
We do. The problem with drug use is a lot of it is a misdemeanor, and we have to see it in our presence. Otherwise, we cannot make the arrest. But if it's happening in front of the officers, then we do make arrests.
And just to build on that a little bit, because I think it's important for people to understand the challenge that LAPD has here too. Let's suppose you do arrest that person for a drug possession, drug use, or even a drug sales offense. And you take them down, you book them, they're in county jail pending trial. How long will they be in jail?
Well, a very short time.
Because our jails are overcrowded to the point that if a person gets a 6-month sentence, let's say, for a misdemeanor offense, how long do they actually serve?
You know, they usually, I have to say, a lot of times they're not even making it to court in custody. They're being released before court. Due to Prop 47, which I know a lot of people voted for, and they really don't want people to have jail as a punishment for drug possession. We all get that. Our office has tried to adapt its rehab facility, because that's the person pretty much can be offered rehab and not jail. We weren't getting any takers on our rehab, so we've been trying to adjust the program to make it more attractive. It's really difficult. People spend next to no time in jail for any possession of any of the narcotics.
Well, and even if it's not a drug offense, for any misdemeanor, you know, if it's not a person who has a violent felony history, that person's probably going to do, you know, what? Anybody, a week, 2 weeks on a 6-month sentence, something like that?
No.
No,
Not
Captain,
even that.
Captain, not even that? Yeah, so this is part of the challenge they have, and why they've all repeatedly said it's very difficult to kind of arrest your way out of this problem, because they'll be right back. All right, so let's use that as our cue to move into mental health. Why can't those who are obviously dealing with serious mental health issues be placed in mental care facilities? And I have one particular guy that I see all the time in my neighborhood who, and many of you know this guy, but he routinely walks in the middle of the street, you know, right down Laurel Canyon Boulevard, and he's walking in the street. The man is certainly going to die. He is certainly going to die. Now, if that isn't, danger to yourself or others, I don't know what is. So why is it that we can't deal with obvious mental health issues in some way that allows them or forces them to get care?
You know, I'm not sure of the right person from the county to answer this, but I know that there's legal humanitarian issues, there's civil rights issues, and also the word obvious can be a little tricky. I mean, what's obvious to the council member may not be, obvious to somebody else, but they do have civil rights. And then there is a way for, individuals who are obviously, or somebody makes an assessment that they're obviously mentally ill and a danger to themselves. It's called a 5150 hold. They can only hold him for 72 hours. And I know the Gita can maybe talk more about that, but it has to do a lot with the civil rights and the fact that we don't have very many mental facilities where we can just take people. So if Gita, you want to talk about more of the legal issues, 5150?
Sorry, I feel like I'm the annoying lawyer that's answering all the questions, but you know, it is really hard under 5150 to hold someone for longer than 72 hours. LAPD has a great SMART team that can come out. There's DMH can come out and do evaluations, but in our experiences, we've seen that really is not going to hold the person that's in the middle of the street, because when they come in for the evaluation, they answer all the questions correctly. They get stabilized, and it's a whole ball game. Things you can try are working, you know, actually our neighborhood prosecutor did a great job of trying to build a case using Laura's Law, but it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort. And with LAPD's help, it can really try and get people to use that law and get them some help. So that's one thing to do.
The days when people could just get locked up in a mental institution, folks, are long gone. So even when they're a threat to themselves or others, 72 hours under 5150. So, and the shame is that so many of these people, you know, are suffering from an illness that if they just took a medication, for example, they could be, you know, perfectly contributing members of our society, but their illness itself is preventing them from doing even that. So, all right, so I'm going to move into housing. I have to proceed quickly through some of these issues. I'm sorry. But basic question. Why aren't there enough shelters or housing in the city of Los Angeles? What housing options are available to homeless people in CD2? So, John, you want to start off with that? And maybe, Meg, you can add to that?
Sure, thank you. So I'm going to take the part of this question about what housing options are available to homeless people in CD2. So, as I mentioned earlier about the coordinated entry system, we do an assessment of everyone who's out that's homeless. Our job is to do an assessment. So we are assessing every single person to determine their vulnerability, determine how acute they are on a scale. We use a evidence-based assessment tool which provides us their acuity level that also dictates what housing intervention we are going to try to assist that person with. So when we are doing an assessment, bridge housing or interim housing is in short supply. That's our temporary housing. And we really are targeting that for the most highly vulnerable people to put into that approach, so that we can get those individuals off of the street and work with them intensely to get into permanent housing. But that doesn't mean that if you're not placed in a bridge housing environment that we do not work with you to get permanent housing. We work with a lot of individuals on the streets to get them into housing straight from the street, a direct housing first approach, and we have success in doing that. If you're a family, however, families are not allowed to sleep on the street per county and city mandates. So we do have the Homeless Services Center, the Family Services Center, FSC, which is located at our facility on Lankershim Boulevard, 7817 Lankershim, where a family can go and get access to a motel for the night. And what's interesting is that we are, as the lead for the family CES system, we funnel the money or a pass-through for putting families in motels. And on any given night, we are paying for anywhere from 100 to 150 families in motels within our San Fernando Valley and Santa Clarita Valley, or San Fernando Valley, every single night. And that's a huge number when you think about those families sleeping in motels and what that does to children. And we are looking at better options, trying to rent out large homes where we can have 4 or 5 bedrooms and put families there, which is a much better environment. The other thing I just want to mention, CD2 has been, and this is a result of strong support from the council office when we talk about permanent supportive housing, CD2 has 5 buildings within the district here for permanent supportive housing for a total of 219 units. And those buildings look like any other apartment, but they are housing our most vulnerable people. And that assessment that I talked about earlier is used to identify who is most in need of that high intensive effort. So we're not just putting anyone and everyone there, but we are making sure that the right people are getting placed.
I like to say they look better than most of the apartments in the neighborhood. They're great, but 219 units, some of them at the cost of, not taxpayer cost necessarily, but of total cost of all of the sources of funding. Some of these are $500,000, $400,000, $500,000 a unit. And so when you think about the need to house 34,000 people, the idea of building enough of those sorts of buildings, it's unfathomable. So that brings me to my next set of questions, which is, with per unit cost that high, how can the city ever make any real progress on the vast homelessness problem? And related to that, Meg, I think these will both be for you. Can't the city place tiny homes or mobile homes on state property or county property? Can't we put up, something more temporary than that is much less costly, so that at least in this emergency situation, people have a place to take shelter?
Yeah. So, in response to your first question about the per unit cost, that is definitely something that has been going up around the city. Citywide, for all kinds of housing, per unit costs are very high. That has to do with materials. It has to do with the cost of land. It has a lot to do with that there's just a lot of construction going on, and it's the same construction crews. And so our developers are competing, trying to find the same general contractors as just a for-profit market rate housing developer, and costs are going up all over the place. The thing that is important to remember, though, is that city money, Proposition HHH, and other funds are not the only sources of funds for permanent supportive housing. So we are subsidizing up to right now about $220,000 of the cost of any one of those units with Proposition HHH. That's the ceiling. That doesn't mean that that per unit subsidy changes depending on the project. There's a lot of hope, I think, in other sources of funding that are coming down from the state level. A program called No Place Like Home, that once the regulations are approved, hopefully we would leverage that money, and then our city costs, again, our city funding into any one unit will go down. We'll be able to lower that per unit maximum subsidy. The other thing that is coming that we would really urge your support for is the permanent supportive housing ordinance. It was just heard in the Homelessness and Poverty Committee yesterday. This ordinance is designed to help make our money for Proposition HHH go farther. It's reducing, for instance, parking requirements on permanent supportive housing buildings, because those buildings currently have to have the same amount of parking as any other building. The parking sits empty, and it's really expensive to build, and it takes up space that could be units without at all changing how the building looks from the outside. So these buildings all look the same from the outside, and largely would have, while they may have more units, they would have the same number of people, because they're not. It's not actually adding to the number of people that are coming into a neighborhood with any building that could be built by right. And also, by making it a ministerial process rather than discretionary, it will shorten the development time from 3 years to 1 year, and I think that's pretty conservative. So that's holding costs. That's going to reduce the cost again. So the cost of that $500,000 per unit cost will go down with this permanent supportive housing ordinance. And it's a really, really important thing the city is trying to do regulatorily to get out of our own way and produce more units. A question about tiny homes and other it's interesting. Our code doesn't really help us to facilitate the tiny homes. They kind of have to comply as though they are an existing house. And the time and effort it takes to go into changing that code, we could spend on other things to try that would have a bigger impact than the number of tiny homes you could put on a lot. We are actually looking at our emergency shelter declaration. There's a new state law that allows us to make an emergency shelter emergency declaration similar to what we've done every year, but gives us a lot more flexibility on how we can comply with or relax city and state codes to get shelters established more quickly. And we're working very, very heavily on trying to establish a kind of a new set of rules that would allow us to establish shelters faster and at a larger scale than we have in the past. And this also gets to how funding has changed over time. And the first part of your question, why we don't have enough shelter beds. We have a lot of the funding that we use traditionally before we had Measure H and before we had Proposition HHH to pay for shelter was federal funding that has in the last 10 years really shifted towards permanent housing, which is a good thing. Like that should be our priority. And in most places it works because their homeless population is much smaller, and they can build enough units to build their way out of their homeless problems. Here in LA, it's a much more difficult problem, and we haven't, until we have Measure H, had local money to backfill the money that is not available for shelters from the federal level anymore.
The building and safety issues are vexing and aggravating.
Yes.
It's a very big priority for me. And one of the things that we're looking at too is the opportunity to find locations for prefab housing.
Yep.
They have some actually very nice units that are basically the size of a shipping container that have everything you need really for short-term housing. They're a fraction of the cost of building these new buildings. Mm-hmm. But part of the problem is you need a place to put them. And, we have a very built-out area here in the San Fernando Valley, and just finding any land upon which to put these things is a part of our challenge. Okay, we're going to have to fly through this remainder here. I'm going to consolidate a number of public health questions into one. And Meg, Jerry, Gonzalo, I think these are all yours. So people are asking, what is being done by the city and the county to prevent the next hepatitis outbreak or outbreaks of other similar contagious diseases? What is the city doing to keep our parks and our libraries clean and safe? And why doesn't the city have sufficient public restrooms, and what's being done about this?
I'll kick those off. So the County of Los Angeles, in declaring the outbreak, has done a lot to increase and really intensely do outreach around vaccinations. The County Department of Public Health, and in cooperation with outreach teams that are both operated out of LAHAA and at private service providers, going out to try and do outreach about the risk for hepatitis A and also get people to be vaccinated. Just in December, the City Council approved funding for a number of different options around expanding bathroom access. It's not cheap, but it is something that we're piloting 4 different mobile pit stops, is similar to San Francisco's model, where portable toilets will be brought in the morning, taken out at night. There will be an attendant there to clean them between uses to make them usable to the population, and we're going to see how that works. But then also, I think really the thing about why we don't have sufficient public restrooms, because our public restroom infrastructure really isn't designed to be available to, or with the homeless population in mind, because in the light of our public infrastructure, the scale of this problem especially is relatively new. Did I get all 3 of them?
I think so.
Close enough? As far as parks, actually, the other thing I think the city funds, yes. Actually, there's it's called a PrEP program, and park restroom, I can't remember what EMP stand for, but in every council district, there are a number of parks that have been identified as being where the restrooms are heavily used by people experiencing homelessness, and those restrooms are cleaned more frequently to kind of mitigate the impact of that. But at this time, that's the funding that we're actually administering for that to address that question.
Great, thank you.
I'll briefly talk about the parks,
ahead.
just really quickly. That the County Board of Supervisors approved 40 additional outreach workers to really focus on those public spaces like parks. So they will be joining existing outreach teams, but they will be focusing on parks and libraries where homeless go.
Great, thank you. And I know there's been a big focus by LAPD as well in ensuring safety of our library patrons of late, because that has been a major problem, and it's a big priority. So I want to close on this last question before we go to our breakout sessions, because I know that my constituents are compassionate people, but sometimes it's we're not sure what the right thing to do to help is. And so this is a question that I think a lot of us ask. Does giving money to homeless people help or hurt them? Is there another way of providing information or assistance, information about programs or other assistance to homeless people? And is it the right thing to do or not? And I think all of us wrestle with that kind of on a daily basis. So Peter or John, do you want to respond to that?
Well, so this is not something that we have a formal policy on or a position. Okay, we don't have a sort of giving position. I will tell you that most of the folks that I work with in this industry and have talked to about it don't personally give money or advocate giving money. I will say that I don't personally, my own personal practice, I give money to organizations that are working to get people off the street and house folks. It is not my practice to give money to people who ask for money on the street. I will also tell you that I will give money to people on occasion. It is not, I would not be able to tell you what the intuition was in me that said that that person needed the money at the time. I don't care actually what they do with the money. That's actually not my business once I give it to them. But it is my practice, my internal, Peter's policy, that I don't give money to individuals, but I do it on occasion, and I will tell you that I don't know why. It'll occasionally burst through, and I will do it, and that's so I violate my policy. I will tell you though that that there is evidence that programs that work to give people money actually do work. There is some research behind a certain strategies that just give cash assistance to people, and that they actually do work to better people's lives. So this is not one where there's a policy or formal interest. I would urge you though to contribute what you can to organizations that are working to house folks. That is what is going to end. That is what is going to end it. Your coordinated entry system lead agency, LA Family Housing, actually put together a really handsome resource sheet. And I think that would be something that, you pull that down, hand those out. That's actually a really good, resource tool. So.
John, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I don't know if this got distributed or not, but this was a sheet. We made copies of this for tonight. I brought about 350 of them, which does list the phone numbers for our Family Solutions Center, homeless outreach team for individuals, and also the information on the Village Family Services. So that's a good resource. Again, in going back to giving money to someone, the personal choice, I don't think there's any right or wrong answer on that. It's what you feel compelled to do. I do know some organizations, a lot of churches and synagogues and so forth, have put together care bags which have resources inside, including hygiene items and some snack items and so forth. That's another option that you can give someone. I would say if you're going to give a bag of something like that, a really nice tool to put in there is a tap card for Metro, so that if you are giving a resource guide, they actually have a way to get there. So I would encourage that as well. A $5 Metro card can go a long way and it was mentioned earlier by the gentleman who had been experiencing homelessness that transportation was a big barrier to getting assistance.
Very good suggestion.
Socks is a big deal as well, yes.
All right. We're going to have to close the panel now just because of the hour, but thank you very much to all the panelists, and I appreciate very much your input, your information, and your hard work in addressing this problem. So, folks, as I promised, even though it's 9 o'clock now, we're going to have people staying to answer your individual questions. But before we do that, I have a couple of other announcements I want to make. But before I get to my announcements, I do just want to recognize all of the public employees who are here. Not only our law enforcement officers, but all of the employees of all of our agencies. They've all worked a long day today, and they're still here today to help us get through this. So thank you all for staying until this late hour. And I especially want to thank my staff, Team Krekorian, for putting today together. So everybody wave your hand, not only for putting today together, but for working every day on your behalf. So a couple of things I want to just mention before we get to our breakouts. Number one, let's not leave tonight without each of us deciding to do something to help. Whatever that is. And there's a number of ways that you can. First of all, the flyer that you received tonight with the agenda on it has some information about what to do, who you can call when it comes to resolving issues in your neighborhood involving homelessness. So, you've got a resource there to use. Number two, if you haven't already signed up on the volunteer sign-up sheet, I hope you will. We'll keep you informed about different things that are going on. Our homeless count that's coming up that you can all participate in. Our Homeless Connect days that we'll continue to have coming up. And we're having a monthly now throughout the valley. So it's a phenomenal way to really make a difference. If you represent an entity, a church or otherwise, that has a parking lot that you would even consider as a safe parking location, please let us know. It's desperately needed. If you're a landlord, or if you know a landlord, somebody who's willing to open up a unit for somebody with a housing voucher. See, they're good for their rent. They're going to pay with housing vouchers. We need landlords to step up and say, yeah, we'll take on folks who are struggling with homelessness. So just a few ways that you can help. And as I say, if we didn't get to your question, I apologize. I'd love to stay here till midnight, but I can tell that not all of you would because so many have left. But if you want to submit an additional question, fill out a card. We'll try to answer it. So in our breakout sessions at our tables, first of all, we have representatives from our great partner in Sacramento, our State Assemblyman Adrien Nazarian here, but we'll also have representatives at these tables from Rec and Parks, from LAPD, from our HOPE teams, from LA Fire Department, LA Sanitation, DOT, especially parking enforcement. Is CHP still here? I don't know if Leland is still here. Okay. Metro, if you have Metro questions, the Office of Supervisor Kuehl is here. The San Fernando Valley Homeless Coalition is here. Safe Parking LA is here. Wave your hands. Who are working on establishing our safe parking programs. We have representatives from Caltrans, our CPAB, HACLA. Boy, that's a long list of folks we have. The League of Women Voters is here, actually, too. We have our Homeless Action Committee. North Hollywood Interfaith Food Pantry is here. That's another way that you can help is with food, which is has been distributed for decades through the North Hollywood Interfaith Food Pantry. LA Sanitation is here, and Village Family Services is here. I've probably missed some, but all along this table, and among your panelists here, and among the folks who are sitting here in the front row who are wearing uniforms, these are the folks who will be able to answer your more specific questions if we haven't addressed them. So I want to, as we break, I just want to thank you all because this has been a terrific experience to bring this community together to try to find solutions for this very, very challenging problem. We're going to have to stick with it, folks. This is not something that's going to happen in a month or a year. This effort that we've talked about through the panel and your participation in being here is something that we're going to have to keep sustaining so that we can protect our neighborhoods and also give dignity and opportunity to those who are most vulnerable in our community. So thank you all very much for participating and have a good evening, everyone.